On June 22nd, 1954, in Christchurch, a quiet winter afternoon was suddenly shattered. Two teenage girls came running out of the park. They were hysterical, their clothes were soaked in blood, their faces were pale with shock. "She's covered in blood. Please, somebody help!" The kiosk owner, Agnes Ritchie's husband, Kenneth, immediately rushed after the girls as they led him back into the park. What they found there was horrific. The woman lay on the ground. Blood was everywhere. She was already dead. It's the 22nd of June, 1954, a cold Tuesday afternoon in Christchurch. Best friends Juliet Hulme and Pauline Parker, along with Pauline's mother, Honora, are heading to Victoria Park for an afternoon walk. The girls are in good spirits. They've already spent most of the day together, laughing, talking, completely absorbed in each other's company. With Pauline and Juliet, it's always like this. Honora, on the other hand, is quieter, but that's nothing unusual. When the bus arrives at Victoria Park just after 2:30, Honora mentions she's feeling thirsty, so the three of them stop at a small tea kiosk near the entrance. They're served by the manager, Agnes Ritchie. From the outside, it looks perfectly ordinary. About half an hour later, the trio continues their walk deeper into the park. It's quiet. The paths are damp beneath their feet. Eventually, they reach a small wooden bridge. Juliet is walking slightly ahead of the others when she suddenly stops. There's something on the ground in front of her, a small pink stone, unusual looking. She calls the others over to take a look, and somehow Honora loses her footing. She slips. At least, that's the story. Because a short time later, Pauline and Juliet burst out of the park. They're hysterical. Their clothes are covered in blood. Agnes recognizes them immediately and is shaken by the state they're in. She tries to comfort Pauline, pressing a hot cup of tea into her hands, but Pauline is in such shock the temperature doesn't even register. She gulps the entire cup down. When Agnes asks what happened, Pauline looks up and says, "She slipped on a plank and hit her head on a brick." Meanwhile, Agnes's husband Kenneth has followed the girls back into the park. When he reaches the scene, he stops dead. Honora Parker is lying on the ground. Her skull has been struck, not once, not twice, dozens of times. And half buried in the scrub nearby, investigators will soon find something else. A half brick wrapped inside a woman's stocking. Not a rock on the path, not a single unlucky fall, a weapon. One that someone brought there. And when detectives begin questioning the girls, the story they're telling starts to take on a very different shape. To understand what happened in Victoria Park that afternoon, you have to go back 2 years, to the moment Pauline Parker met Juliet Hulme. It was 1952 at Christchurch Girls High School. For Pauline, life already felt lonely. As a child, she had spent long periods bedridden with a painful bone infection, weeks at a time stuck inside, separated from other children. She grew used to being alone, and when you spend that much time alone, your imagination becomes your closest companion. Juliet's childhood had been different, but the loneliness felt strangely familiar. She had spent years battling tuberculosis, moving between hospitals and convalescent homes, while other children were at school. Like Pauline, she had grown used to being separated from everyone else. So when the two girls finally met, something clicked almost immediately. Pauline would later write in her diary about the moment she realized she had found someone who understood her completely. She described Juliet as one of the most wonderful people that has ever existed, someone brilliant, someone extraordinary, someone like her. The two girls became inseparable. They walked to school together, sat together in class, spent every spare moment talking, laughing, and building stories together. In Pauline's diary, the excitement practically leaps off the page. She writes about the joy of finally finding someone who shared her imagination, someone who saw the world the way she did. At one point she wrote, "I have found my soulmate." Together, the girls began creating elaborate fantasy worlds. They wrote stories about kings and princes. They imagined grand adventures. And slowly, those stories began to grow into something much bigger. They called it the Fourth World. A beautiful, perfect realm where their favorite historical figures and heroes lived. Saints, artists, rulers, and geniuses. People they believed were superior to ordinary society. In Pauline's writing, the distinction between their world and the real one becomes very clear. The Fourth World was brilliant, creative, extraordinary. The real world was full of what she called moral. And the two girls began to believe they themselves belonged with the extraordinary people, not the ordinary ones. And slowly, almost without anyone noticing, that world began to matter more to them than the real one. At first, the intensity of Pauline and Juliet's friendship seemed harmless. Teenage girls spending all their time together wasn't unusual, but over time, the closeness between them began to take on a different quality. Teachers noticed it first. The girls were rarely seen apart. They walked everywhere together. They whispered constantly in class. When separated, they seemed restless, distracted, almost anxious. At home, Pauline's parents were beginning to notice the same thing. Her diary entries had become filled almost entirely with Juliet. The girls' fantasy world was also growing more elaborate. The Fourth World now had its own history, its own mythology, its own ruling figures. The girls would spend hours acting out scenes from it, completely absorbed in the stories they were inventing together. To Pauline and Juliet, these weren't childish games. This was creativity. This was genius. But to the adults around them, it was beginning to feel unsettling. There were other concerns too. The girls' attachment to one another seemed almost obsessive. They showed little interest in other friendships. They didn't date. They didn't socialize much outside their own private world. And increasingly, they seemed to view anyone who questioned their relationship as a threat. Still, no one imagined anything truly dangerous. At worst, people thought the friendship was simply unhealthy, something the girls might eventually grow out of. But in early 1954, something happened that would change everything. In early 1954, the fragile world Pauline and Juliet had built together began to crack. Juliet's parents' marriage was falling apart. Her mother had started an affair, and the Hulme household had become tense, chaotic, unpredictable. Then the decision was made. Juliet would be leaving New Zealand. She would travel overseas with relatives thousands of kilometers away, and Pauline would not be going with her. To most people, this would have been heartbreaking, but temporary. Teenage friendships end all the time, but to Pauline and Juliet, the idea of separation felt unbearable. In Pauline's diary, the tone of her writing begins to change. The excitement and joy that once filled the pages are replaced with panic, desperation. She writes about the possibility of losing Juliet as if it were the end of the world. At one point, she writes simply, "I cannot exist without Juliet." For Juliet, the situation felt just as desperate. Pauline wasn't just a friend, she was an escape, someone who understood the strange, imaginative world Juliet felt she belonged to. And now that world was about to disappear. The girls began searching for ways to avoid being separated. They considered running away together. They discussed whether Juliet might be able to stay in New Zealand somehow, but every possibility is met by an obstacle. There's always someone standing in the way. And in Pauline's mind, one obstacle becomes clearer than all the others: her mother. Honora Parker had already grown uneasy about the intensity of the girls' relationship. She had started placing limits on how much time they could spend together, and she strongly opposed Pauline traveling overseas with Juliet. In Pauline's diary, the resentment toward her mother begins to grow. At first, it appears as frustration, then anger, and something darker. One entry reads, "Mother is one of the main obstacles." Another entry follows with a chilling question: why could not mother die? At first, the idea seemed almost abstract, the kind of dramatic thought a desperate teenager might write down without ever truly meaning it. But as the weeks pass, the entries become more focused, more deliberate. The idea stops being a fantasy, and slowly it begins to turn into a plan. The idea wasn't coming from one girl alone. The two of them talked about it endlessly, turning the problem over in their minds, convincing each other that what they were planning was somehow justified. In her diary, Pauline writes about the idea with a strange mix of excitement and relief, as if a solution has finally revealed itself. She writes about the two of them discussing it calmly, logically, almost like collaborators solving a problem. Then, on the night before the trip to Victoria Park, Pauline sits down and writes one final entry. It reads, "Tomorrow, I am going to kill my mother." And the next afternoon, Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme board a bus with Honora Parker, heading toward Victoria Park. On the afternoon of June 22nd, 1954, something about the girls seems slightly different from what Honora might have expected. They aren't laughing or chatting the way teenage friends usually do. Instead, Pauline and Juliet are unusually quiet, tense, almost withdrawn. Honora sips her tea calmly, unaware of what the two girls sitting beside her have already decided. After a short while, they finish their drinks and leave the kiosk. Just after 3 o'clock, the three of them begin walking deeper into the park. The tracks are quiet. The winter air is cold and damp beneath the trees. Eventually, they reach a narrow wooden bridge along one of the walking paths. Juliet walks slightly ahead, then she stops. There's something on the ground in front of her, a small pink stone. She calls the others over to take a look. Pauline and her mother step closer. For a brief moment, the three of them stand together on the path. Then, as Honora bends forward to examine the stone, Pauline reaches into her shoulder bag. Inside is a half brick wrapped tightly in a stocking. Without warning, she swings. The first blow strikes Honora on the head. She collapses instantly. What follows is chaotic and brutal. The girls strike again and again and again. Honora struggles, trying to defend herself, but the attack is relentless. By the time it's over, she has been struck more than 40 times. The two girls stand there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then they begin the second part of their plan. They run back towards the tea kiosk, screaming, crying, their clothes soaked in blood. And for the people who see them running out of the park that afternoon, the performance is completely convincing. That evening, the investigation begins. At around 8 p.m., two detectives arrive at the Hulme household, Senior Detective Brown and Detective Sergeant Tate. Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme are both there. The girls are interviewed separately. Pauline repeats the same story she told earlier at the tea kiosk. They had been walking along the track. She was slightly ahead. Her mother had slipped, fallen sideways, hit her head on a rock. She seemed to keep tossing up and down and hitting her head, Pauline explains. Juliet supports the same version of events. An unfortunate accident, nothing more. But as the interview continues, the detectives begin asking about something found at the crime scene, the bloody stocking. Pauline appears momentarily startled. She quickly offers an explanation. She says she had an old stocking in her bag. She used it to wipe blood from her mother's head. Still, something about the story doesn't sit right. Partway through the interviews, Juliet asks to give a second statement. This time, her account changes slightly. She says she didn't actually see the accident happen. She had been walking ahead on the track. She only returned after hearing voices and found Honora lying on the ground. She says she never saw a brick or a stocking. While Detective Sergeant Tate takes Juliet's new statement, Senior Detective Brown remains with Pauline, and then he makes a calculated move. He tells Pauline he believes Juliet had nothing to do with the incident, that she wasn't involved. There is a pause. "Who assaulted your mother?" Brown asks. "I did," Pauline replies. She tells the detective that she had made up her mind to kill her mother several days earlier. She says she brought the weapon with her, a half-brick wrapped inside a stocking, carried in her shoulder bag. She claims Juliet knew nothing about it, that she struck her mother while Juliet was walking ahead. As the confession continues, Pauline admits she struck her mother again and again, a good many times, I imagine, she says quietly. Then she adds something else. "As soon as I started to strike my mother, I regretted it, but I could not stop." Pauline Parker is placed under arrest and taken to Christchurch Police Station. Later that night, detectives search her bedroom. Inside, they find 14 exercise books, a scrapbook, and 2 diaries. Page after page of Pauline's thoughts, her devotion to Juliet, the strange world the two girls had built together. But one entry stands out. It had been written earlier that same day. While Pauline is sitting inside the police station, Detective Tate notices her writing something on a piece of paper. When she finishes, he takes it from her. It reads like another diary entry. June 22nd, 1954. "I have successfully committed murder." In the lines that follow, Pauline describes the day almost casually. She writes that everyone had been kind and sympathetic, that the police seemed to believe her, and that she has been talking 19 to the dozen as if she hasn't a care in the world. Then she writes one final sentence: "I am taking the blame for everything." Within hours, the terrible truth about what happened in Victoria Park is no longer in doubt. This was no accident. In August 1954, Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme stand trial for murder, both found guilty. Because they are only 16 years old, the court cannot sentence them to life imprisonment. Instead, they are ordered to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. And the two girls who once believed they would conquer the world together are separated, forbidden from ever seeing each other again. Pauline Parker eventually left New Zealand and quietly rebuilt her life under another name. She avoided publicity and rarely spoke about the crime that had once shocked the world. Juliet Hulme's life would take a very different turn. After her release, she moved overseas and began writing under a new name, Anne Perry. She became one of the most successful crime novelists in the world. For decades, millions of readers followed the murders and investigations in her stories. Few realized the author behind them had once been convicted of one of the most disturbing murders of the 20th century, a crime she had committed as a teenager on a quiet winter afternoon in Christchurch, in a park where two girls once believed the world was standing in the way of their future and decided to remove it.